I'm Bianca Cotton, host of Behind the Confident Smile. I am here with Adreiona Jennings today. Thank you for being
Hello.
here, Adriana.
Thank you for having me.
We are about to talk about growing up biracial. So, Adriana,
Yes.
when you were born, we're going all the way back to
To
your
birth. To
birthday.
birth.
When you were born and your parents brought you home, what was the first instance since then in your childhood did you realize that you were biracial and what that meant?
So it's actually interesting you asked that because in the hospital when my mom was actually in labor, well, I guess she would be in delivery at this point. The doctor jokingly said, like, "Oh, you have a blonde hair, blue eyed baby," without realizing that I'm actually biracial. So he
Wow.
didn't know my dad was white. So when she's like pushing out and I actually came out, he was like, "Oh, she actually is." So it's literally been like since birth where comments have been made because I was a very light child, just a very light child. And then so coming home with my mom and my older brother is 100% black. So he used to bring his friends over and say, "Oh, look at my sister. She's white, but she's still my sister."
Oh,
So there's
wow.
been little instances like literally since birth. And then in daycare, I went to daycare when I was 18 months old. So from daycare to eighth grade, I was in an all black school. So there were instances in between there where I knew that I was othered, if you will. So just situations with teachers when I would fill out, the scantrons, you have to put your
Oh,
race, throwback
yes.
to scantrons, where you have to put race. And I'm like, oh, can I put other? And they're like, put black. And I'm like, but I'm biracial. And they're like, you're black. So it would be stuff like that where I'm like, huh, okay, how does that work? So those are some of the situations.
Wow. So take us through your parents' journey, right? Your mom is black, your dad is Italian. And how did they talk to you about being biracial? It sounds like a lot of other people outside of the house and inside
Mhm.
with your brother saying, "Oh, my sister's white, but she my
Right.
sister." What did your parents say to you about being biracial?
So my parents actually did not talk to me about race. I had a few instances with them in particular growing up. There was a situation where I was in the mall with my dad, and as you mentioned, my dad is Italian. I was in the mall with my dad, and a white woman came up to me, and we're holding hands, and she's like, "Are you lost?" And I'm like, "What are
Mm.
you talking about?" And she's like, "Do you need help?" And I'm holding my dad's hand, and I'm so confused. And at this point, I'm like maybe 7 or 8, so I'm, like, aware, but not fully aware, and I'm like, "No, this is my dad," and she's just like, "Oh, I'm so sorry," and so my dad kinda, like, he just, like, let her go, and he's like, "There's just people who don't understand, like, you're my daughter," and I was so confused because 'cause I'm like, "But you're my dad." And so for someone to blatantly come up to me and be like, "Do you need help?" It was just very weird. So that was really the only time he and I talked about race. He did pass when I was 12, so he and I weren't able to have, adult conversations. And with my mom, we talked about it when I would have an experience. And so
Mm.
my first experience being called the N-word was like in 3rd grade.
Mm.
This boy came to school, just, a little white boy. And he was just, you're, and we're like, what? And mind you, like I said, I went to an all black school. So for him to come in and just be this bold, like you're clearly getting this messaging from home. You don't just,
Right.
So we used to like chase him home to like beat him up. It's
Oh
so bad. It was
no.
so bad. We never caught him. So it got so bad to the point where the bus driver would actually like drop him off in front of his house and then wait until he went fully inside and then let us off because it got that bad. He had Confederate flags around his house. It was
Oh
just
no.
terrible. So, I would tell that to my mom, and my mom's like, "Oh, he's just ignorant." So that would be
Mm.
brushed off as that. But then in 6th grade, when I had a friend who actually called me the N word, and she and I would hang out every single day, white girl. And that one really impacted me. So that one is the one where I went home and I was crying. Like, I don't understand why she would say that. So, my mom, she did her best to console. I've expressed before, I know that parenting, your job is to protect. And you don't want there's certain conversations that are just very hard to have. And I think race is one of those conversations.
Mm.
And so instead of like leaning into the discomfort, it was more of a like, I want you to love everyone and be safe and protected, but also I don't know how to have the conversation. So those were, it was learning in the moment, which was tough.
Yes, I can
Very
only
tough.
imagine tough as a child learning in the
Right.
moment. When you reflect on those moments, how do you feel about them now?
Oh man. So the third grade incident, it's interesting because the guy actually like sent me a friend request on Facebook.
Oh.
And this is like this is like 20, 20 some years ago. And it's interesting because even in the moment I saw his name, I went
Mm.
back to my 8-year-old self. And I was like, how dare you even reach out to me? And so I have no interest in being your friend. And that's probably more internal work I have to do, which, but I think we all as, black people, et cetera, we remember the time
Mm.
that we recognize the hatred that's out there because of who we are. So that was that. And then, just moving forward, it's just interesting. It's just interesting
Yeah.
because it's like you want people to appreciate you, love you for who you are, but you also recognize like there's some people who just can't get past who you are. And it's hard.
Yeah.
It can be hard.
It can
It
be
can be
hard.
hard.
Did growing up biracial impact your self esteem?
Oh my gosh, tremendously. So, as I mentioned, the 18 months through 8th grade being in an all black school, it was my experience was more so with colorism. So I was told I'm not black enough. I'm not really black. I'm not all the way black. My hair wasn't like my actual. So I remember instances where I would actually pull my hair to prove it was real, like my actual hair,
Mm.
to like show people like, no, this is really my hair, to the point where I would have headaches. Like it was so bad. And then my freshman year through high school, like so all of my high school year was at a predominantly white school. So shifting from all black to all white is a total, it's like a mind adjustment. And so then going to, oh, now I really don't fit in. Because that wasn't my full experience in my all black school. I had great experiences and I love, being around black people. So to go to an all white school, it was just like like more of a trying to shrink myself. Like, let me not be noticed. Let me try to assimilate. So let me try to dress like them. Let me try not to talk loudly. Let me try to code switch. So it was that adjustment. And so it was like, where do I really fit in? Because I don't know who I belong to. I don't belong to the white group because I can clearly look at, the white group and see I don't fit in here. And then with the black group, it was, I fit in to a certain level. And constantly hearing, even in my adult years, hearing, oh, you're not black enough or you're not really black. Like, okay, we're still doing this. Like we're
But who creates those standards?
and that's so it's interesting you say that because part of my being able to reconcile, like I'm a black woman, is President Obama wrote in one of his books, there's more than one way to be black. And after reading that, and he's biracial himself. And so after reading that, it really settled with me like, oh, you don't always have to have like I call it a boys in the hood story. But like
True.
right, like you
True.
don't have to like have to live in poverty and have
Hmm.
rats and people do have those stories. And
Right.
I appreciate all of the spectrum of our blackness. Like we can have those stories and we can have stories where we went to the ballet and we went traveling. So those were the stories where I'm like, oh, I don't have to have this in order to be that. So yeah, that really helped me be like, girl, you black.
Enjoy your blackness.
Enjoy your black and don't be ashamed of it.
Right. But it takes a journey to get from
Yes.
I'm wrestling
Right.
with my blackness
Hmm.
and my biracialness and my whiteness to I'm embracing all of me.
Yes.
What did it take to get to that point?
That took years. That took therapy. That took reading. Man, that's a great question because I'm like, it really took me in my 30s to actually reconcile that, and it's so fascinating because when President Obama ran for office, I'm like, yes, like someone who I could connect with. And even when I was a kid, I used to watch T and Tamara. And so,
Hmm.
like, or Sister Sister. And so for me, I'm like, the imaging was like, oh, there's
Yeah.
finally someone who's biracial and I connect with. And they
Hmm.
had a white dad. And I was like, oh, I have that too. So that was important to me. And then, Holly Berry. So there were so many symbols. And then, like I said, when President Obama ran for office, I was just like, oh my gosh, someone that looks like me and, has my experience or vice versa. That helped, but there was still this like, where do I fit in? And so
Mm.
I got a mentor who was very, adamant on just letting me go through my journey of like me. What I've recognized is with when my dad passed when I was young, I lost that, my
Yeah.
father. And so I wanted ways to continue to connect with him. And I felt like if I were to claim blackness, that I would lose that piece of him.
Mm.
And so I just always felt like, no, I'm biracial, because that was the piece that connected me to him without realizing like it could be a both and. Like,
Right.
because he's not here doesn't mean that me claiming I'm black doesn't take away, who he is in my life or who he was in my life. Um, and also recognizing like the privileges that he had didn't extend to me. And so him being a white male, I don't have white male privileges.
Correct.
I just don't. And that's okay. Like, okay, it doesn't take away. And so for me to be able to like literally within the last like 5 or 6 years be like, you are a black woman, you are proud. It doesn't take anything away from your father. You still have a white father who you love and etc. Like it was a release for me. Like it was
Mm.
very, that's a good way to say that. So I'm like, oh,
Yeah.
it was a release. Like you
That's
don't have to wrestle anymore.
no. You can just walk into it.
You can walk into it.
And knowing, that you still have one parent that's still living, your mom, and your mom's side of the family. What was that like growing up with the aunties, right? Like we got the aunties
Right.
and the grandmas, and uh how did they see you?
I was fully embraced. There was never any like, she doesn't belong or she's not, I was just, I got teased for being light skinned, but it was a very, oh, you're a light skinned child. Nothing aggressive, if that makes sense. And then, just learning how to do my hair, that's a whole nother
Oh yes, the hair.
that's a whole nother podcast in itself. But
Because your hair doesn't need a pressing comb or uh, necessarily flat irons
right.
and relaxer
Right.
because of the texture of
Right.
your hair.
So my texture was not like anybody else's texture, but it was treated, with the same
With the
the same
same
love,
treatment.
right? As we give other textures. So, the perm and then the flat iron and the hot comb just and then my hair just would fall out. And I'm like,
Mm.
oh no. So my mom, was once that happened, she took me to a stylist who was like, oh no, we gotta make sure we treat this pattern with the respect that it needs. So
Mm.
yeah, but there was never I never felt othered. The only time I did was my brother and my mom are darker complected. And so when we would be out, a lot of people would think my brother and I were in a relationship. Like when
Mm.
we got older, they're like, oh, that's you. And he's like, that's my sister. Like, he's so
Oh
mad.
wow.
We're 5 years apart, 5.5. So
That's still very awkward.
it's so awkward. Like,
You like,
you think I'm dating my brother?
no.
And he would get and it's interesting because side by side we look alike. It's just our skin tones are different. But if you put us next to each other, we look alike. So yeah, there was never any issues on that side. On my mom's
Wow.
side.
I want to go back to this hair piece of all the things being done to your texture and your hair falling out.
Mhm.
How did that make you feel?
It was another indicator of like I don't it was like I don't fit in. Like, why
Mm.
isn't my hair like everyone else's type of thing? And then to also be teased about your hair, like, it's very big and fluffy and very Diana Ross. That's what they used to say. Your hair is very Diana Ross. And so for me, be young, I didn't know who Diana is. Hair wasn't like it is now. You can embrace your curls and your
Right.
frizz, but back in the 80s, 90s, like
People
no.
trying to lay it
Yes.
slick.
So it was another indicator of like, why can't my hair just be like theirs?
Mm.
Why can't I just, wear, because I didn't even do like braids. The one time I had braids in, again, it pulled my hair out. And so it was like, I can't like fit in. It was another thing of me not fitting in. And then of course my hair didn't like mirror any white women's hair. So I'm like, okay. So again, another reason when Tia and Tamara had their curls, I was like, oh gosh, yes, those are my curls too.
Right.
So yeah.
tune in this Friday on CAN TV Channel 19 at 7:30 p.m. for another episode of In My Own Words featuring my special guest, Chief of Staff to the co-CEO of Ariel Investments, Victoria Watkins.
I remember telling people when I was at the city, oh my God, this is a dream job I never dreamt. And now I feel like that's happening again.
Do you mentor other young people who are biracial? Like, has that ever come up for you?
You know what? I have, and it's interesting because the ones that I have she and I had a similar experience of feeling othered, of feeling left out, and we have conversations about that. And I let her express herself because I know it's a journey, and I know not all biracial journeys look the same.
Mhm.
I think one of the bonuses for me, if you will, is that my mother is Black, and so she and I are able to have conversations. But I don't know how I would maneuver if I had a white mother. Like, are you able to connect with me? And I do think it does matter what parent is. What? That's just me. I could be
Mhm.
wrong. um, but yeah, I just let her express herself and encourage her where I can. I have young ladies who are like not biracial or fully Black. And I still get those comments of like, oh, I like your hair. Oh, I like your skin, like that.
Mhm.
And I encourage them, your hair is perfect the way it is, your skin. So it's like, again, even years later, there's still this colorism, there's still this, hair piece. And, you have to encourage and empower young ladies and young men um, for who they are and write
Right.
exactly who they are.
Mm. That's good. You that what I mean by it's good is you have opened yourself up to be able to pour back into those who
Mm,
are experiencing similar challenges and saying, "Hey, I didn't see too many people on TV that look like me, or in my community that look like me. There's no one way to
mhm,
live this life
mm,
as a person who has a Black mom or Italian dad or a white mom or
mhm.
whatever the combination is, and the parents that you have to find your own voice."
Yes. And it's interesting that even all of these years later, it's still the same comments. Like, you think you're cute. It was funny because I actually like got slightly triggered. I was leading a group and this one girl kind of just made the comment under her breath, like, she thinks she cute because she light skinned. And I heard, like, I went back to my 7, 8, 9-year-old self, and I was just like, and I had to catch myself. I was like, oh, there's still a part of me that needs to. And I had a
That needs
conversation.
to
I
heal.
challenged her on that. Like, I can't help my skin color. Like,
Right.
let's discuss why you feel that way. And
Right.
so she and I had a whole conversation, and she recognized she was just regurgitating, what she
What she
heard.
heard.
And so I'm like, we're still doing this all these years.
Yes.
But
Like, when will it end?
when?
When? When?
Right.
Oh man, I I want to know, now that you're in adulthood, right? Have you ever had an opportunity to talk with your mom about what you felt like growing up biracially, since there wasn't an intentional conversation from either of your parents?
Huh. So we discussed it when I told her I was doing this podcast. I'm like, "Mom, let's discuss." And her feedback is, I just wanted you to love everyone, and I didn't. So I do recognize that if you make something such a what's the word I'm looking for? Like, if you highlight something so much, so if you
Mm,
make, and I don't like when people say you make everything about race, but if she's having these conversations with me, like, white people are going to look at you this way, I can look that up. Like, I can draw that energy towards me, if that makes
mm,
sense. So I can attract things like, oh, see, she doesn't like me because this, she doesn't like me. And, my mom is not that person. She does not like victimhood. She doesn't like any of that. So I can understand from that piece. And I also, growing up in the church, and you love everyone, and which I agree. But I do think there's a level of responsibility to educate your children
mm,
about race, racism, just everything, every ism that there is, they should be educated. And so, her approach was just really, I wanted you to love everyone, and I wanted everyone to love you. So to see me for who I am versus, the color of my skin. They wanted to see the content of my character. But yeah, so that's really it. I do still think there is a level of it's a hard conversation to have.
Right.
And, unless you have solutions, it can be very defeating.
Mm.
Even with police, I get pulled over and you have that experience with the cops. And it's like you go back and you're like, you're sad and there's
Mhm.
nothing you can do because these are the rules we live by.
Right.
And it's not fair. It's just what it is.
It is what it is.
And so
right now.
that's hard. I can't, even when I have the conversation with the young people I work with and they're like, well, what do we do? And I'm like, it's heartbreaking at times. Like, dang, like
It is.
there's nothing we can do. We got to play the game.
Know the rules.
Know the rules of the game.
Be aware.
Yeah.
The emotional labor.
So much.
It's from listening to you speak, it sounds like your life has been full of additional emotional labor.
That's well said.
Yeah.
Yes.
The navigating of spaces and places without adequate tools earlier on.
Yes.
And now learning like, okay, there are books, there are podcasts, there are other people that I can speak with. So building your toolkit, what tools would you share with others that, in addition to therapy, that has had an impact on you, in addition to Obama?
I would say so. I took Dr. Joy DeGrew's class. She has a 10-week course that she offers.
And who is Dr.
Oh my
Joy?
gosh, she's everything. No, she is. Oh man, I don't know her exact title, but she wrote the book Post Traumatic Slave Syndrome. She does workshops, she does conferences, etc. She's wonderful, and so I got introduced to her, like literally introduced to her at a meeting. And I just was like, oh my gosh, I need to read. And so I read her book and then attended her workshops and took her class. I went like full in. And it really helped heal me. And her tagline, if you will, is "Be the healing."
Yes.
And so I was just like, oh my gosh, this was so. And so it's knowing the history of enslavement of your people, etc., and like really embracing your blackness and recognizing blackness is beautiful. And so I think for years, to answer your question, to be in settings and see news and media where your blackness is always from a negative standpoint. Your drug dealers, your prostitutes, your this, your that. And during Black History Month, all we talk about is MLK. And so to have the full spectrum of like, oh no, we're doctors and we're lawyers and I can be that. And a lot of
Right.
people, there's so much anti-blackness because of the stereotypes and the way that the world has viewed us. And to love and embrace that side of me, that's freeing.
Beautiful.
That is freeing. So knowing the history and knowing your full history, like you're more than just what the media has portrayed or etc. Like we're such a diverse population. Like it's freeing. So that's one tool. Having conversations, being honest with yourself. And I do recognize, like I said, it's an individual journey. And a lot of people, it's hard for them to come to that reconciliation because some people do want to identify as solely I'm biracial, and that is totally fine. Like I'm not taking away that from anyone. My journey is I'm a biracial woman, but I'm a Black woman.
You're a Black woman. Say that with your chest,
right?
Like that.
Right. And so I did want to share when we talked about going to like predominantly white institutions in school. Even that experience with not dating, because like, do white guys approach Black girls or? So
it depends.
Right, not at the school I went to. There was no. So again, being left out of homecoming, I did go to prom, but of course, I went with the other Black guy that was in school. So it's like those moments of not really having a boyfriend, not going to homecoming, and not. So there's just so many other factors that you want. When people look back at their high school, they're like, "Oh, I did this and this and that," and I'm like, "Yeah, I didn't do any of that."
And being at a predominantly white institution, and you shared that the white guys wouldn't approach you. Did the Black guys approach you?
So what's interesting is not really. So it's so interesting that you say that. So there weren't too many Black guys, but The ones that were there did not approach me. It wasn't until my senior year where I actually started dating someone. So yeah, that's interesting that you said that, because the black guys either dated like the one other black girl or the white girls. So then that also factors into your self-esteem of
Right.
like, man,
Am I good enough?
am I good enough?
Or what's repelling them?
Right. And then it also again plays into that I don't fit in. Like I don't
Right.
fit in with the black. Like you're not dating the black girl. You're dating the white girl. But where do I fit in? So yeah, it's interesting. It's a very interesting experience.
Have you experienced that even into your adulthood around dating?
So I've only ever dated black men, because I just love black men, love black men. But I've never had anyone who's not black approach me. I've heard people, I was at a setting not too long ago, and a mutual friend came over, like, "Oh, this guy over there is interested in you, but he's scared to approach you." And I'm like, "Why?" It was a white guy. I still don't know who the white guy is. Whatever. He never approached me. So yeah, I'd never had a non-black person approach me. So it's interesting. I don't know if I would date outside of my race. Like I said, I've only dated black men. I would want to know why. I have no issue with interracial relationships. Obviously, I'm the product of an interracial relationship. My question is the why. In terms of,
Mm.
are you fetishizing the opposite race? And so if a white guy approaches me, why are you interested in a black woman? Is what I would ask. And
The
some
skepticism.
people want, the black guy experience. I've heard that growing up.
Explain
Not
that
growing
more.
up, sorry. I've heard white women say like, "Oh, I've heard black guys are,
Mm.
So it gets back to how we were treated, back in the day. Like you just want to
Not as a
experiment.
person, but as a
Exactly.
thing.
Exactly. So I'm not opposed to it. I just, again, I want to know the why. Some people look at Latinx women like, "Oh, they're spicy," and they're, like those little buzzwords. And when you start doing that, you're not seeing me for the humanity that I deserve. You're seeing, what you think that you can get from me.
Wow.
Like, "Oh, I want to have a black guy experience," or, "Oh, black women, just all the different, and then some black men look at white women as like they're the pinnacle. And so, "Oh, I won because I got a white woman."
Mm.
I'm always just curious about it. Not always, but I would just want to know. Like, you're not fetishizing. Some people want mixed babies.
Right.
We know a whole family that has a family of mixed babies. And it's like, why do you want
Why
all
do
these
you
mixed
want that?
children?
Mm. What do you want your 5-year-old self to know?
Ooh. 5-year-old self.
Yeah.
Girl, you gonna make it, girl. Look, you gonna be all right. 5-year-old self, yes. I would say to her, take up space, embrace who you are, love who you are. Um, Life is gonna life, but you
part.
got this. Persevere. It's good. And live a soft life too.
Mm.
Like you don't have to be this, like you deserve softness and goodness. That's good. That just blessed me.
Ooh. Again, Adreiona, thank you for sharing and bringing light to this very much needed conversation
Thank
today.
you. Thank you, Bianca, for having me.
A pleasure.